Lately, the enduring and important relationship between Canada and the U.S. has been strained like never before. A delegation of Republican and Democratic American senators headed to Parliament Hill on Friday to talk trade and security with the Prime Minister and some of his cabinet. With a special focus on automotive and defense manufacturing, the bipartisan group wants to underline how intertwined our two countries are when it comes to the economy and security, and extend on the goodwill established recently from Prime Minister Carney's visit with Donald Trump. We spoke with both a Democrat and a Republican on that trip. First, here's Tim Kaine, Democratic Senator from Virginia. Senator Kaine, thank you so much for sitting down with us and making time. I know you have an incredibly packed schedule here.
We're really excited, Mercedes, to have this bipartisan group of senators visiting Ottawa today.
Tell me about this bipartisan group, because it's a time where we see such tremendous division, especially in the United States. Canadians are very concerned about our relationship. What made you decide to come to Canada as this united front, essentially, to talk to the Canadians?
I think we were aware, because we all have great friends in Canada, that there was a lot of anxiety about, well, gosh, what do Americans think of us? What's going on? And the five of us wanted to come to say, look, we love Canada, we love Canadians. The relationship has been so strong for so long. There's, a little bit of chop in the water. We have a new, leader. Canada has a new leader. So let's, as we're starting off this new chapter with two new leaders, let's do what we can as the Article I branch in the U.S. government to demonstrate this continuous friendship, and then talk about the issues where we can still look for some resolution. But I think things are going in a positive direction, especially since the Prime Minister's visit to Washington a couple weeks back. And we just felt like a visit soon after that, where we come here, would send a good message.
You called the fentanyl crisis with Canada essentially fake. It was made up. The Americans, when you're talking about the White House, I shouldn't say the Americans broadly, but the White House says, no, there's a huge crisis with Canada. They grouped us in with Mexico. When you looked at the numbers and at the facts, why did you come to the conclusion that this was not a real crisis and Canada was not a national security threat?
Any reasonable person would come to that conclusion. Fentanyl is a crisis. Fentanyl is an emergency, but it is an emergency driven largely by China and Mexico. And the amount of fentanyl that was interdicted at the Mexican border in 2023 was about 21,000 pounds. In Canada, it's somewhere less than 43 pounds. We've been able to identify 43 pounds, but even digging into that number, some of that was fentanyl that was interdicted in the northern United States that might have come from Canada. So look, and Canada is doing things to deal with fentanyl issues, and so we can work on that together. But I just view it was an effort by the president to try to impose tariffs unilaterally, and to do so he had to declare an emergency, and that was the emergency he came up with. I have a different feeling about how tariffs should be used than the president does. I think tariffs are to be used against adversaries, and in particular cases, even with an ally. Canada and the U.S. have had some tussles about lumber or dairy products. Okay, in those specific instances, you sometimes use tariffs, not necessarily because you want tariffs, but you sort of think, well, maybe if we do this, we can bring down tension and negotiate. Plus, Donald Trump negotiated a trade deal with Canada and Mexico that includes mechanisms for resolving disputes. And so I think the right answer, and I said this in Halifax in November after the president was elected, but before his inauguration, what's the way to deal with tariff or other issues? Donald Trump negotiated a USMCA deal that got 89 votes in the Senate. I mean, it was very bipartisan in its acceptance. It was a real achievement for him. And that is, in my view, the right way to deal with these issues.
What effect have the tariffs had on the United States economically?
Bookings of Canadians to come to Virginia Beach are down significantly, and colleagues of mine in other states are saying the same thing about tourism. So we're definitely seeing it.
How important do you think it is for the Canadian government to act quickly on deals with the United States, whether it is renegotiating, we call it CUSMA, you call it USMCA, the trade agreement that Donald Trump has now said is unfair, that of course he negotiated, or the Golden Dome, which the president brought up the other day that Canada is looking at being invested in, the missile defense system. Is there a sense of a ticking clock on these things to move quickly with the Trump administration?
Here's the way I would look at it. Let me use the UK as an example. The president announced a deal with the UK quickly. UK was in the door quick. If you look at the deal, it's a framework but with a lot still to be determined. But they reached an agreement on the framework. So what that means is, I think it would be good to try to do something quickly, but you don't have to resolve every issue. You know, get a framework in place. I'm a member of the Armed Services and Foreign Relations Committee, so I am interested today to talk to the Prime Minister, Foreign Minister, Defense Minister about things like, you know, NATO, Golden Dome, security arrangements. You know, the Canadians are our an amazing partner in the Arctic, icebreakers. I mean, there's all kinds of things we're doing together. And so I think if the President and Prime Minister could find a framework and maybe a couple of deliverables right away, we don't have to solve every issue right away. But I do think on the trade side, uncertainty creates chaos, and chaos hurts the economies of both nations. So more certainty sooner means everybody can settle down and focus.
I do want to ask you the defense and security question, particularly because you're a Democrat. There was a lot of concern from the Biden administration as well about Canada's defense spending, moving more quickly, spending more. There was concerns as well about the border and security. When you look at this, and you know, you're not speaking for the Republicans, you're not speaking for Donald Trump, you're speaking for the Democrats. What does Canada need to do from an American perspective to meet the requirements? I mean, obviously there's NATO spending, et cetera, but what needs to be done from sort of this other view than the Republican view?
I think the commitment of the Prime Minister to get to 2% is great. President Trump is now encouraging we all got to go beyond that to 5%. That would be hard for the U.S. But I think I think this issue of we can't be naive about Russia's intentions. Putin's not stopping with Ukraine, and Russia's not stopping after Putin. And the best way to provide a check against Russia is for NATO to be stronger and stronger. So let's find creative ways to get to whatever the commitment level is. It's 2% now. Canada, the Prime Minister has announced that we get there. But it's not just about a number. It's also about what are the capacities that really make sense. And in that sense, the Golden Dome that the President talks about, it's basically a missile interceptor. You know, missiles sort of have three phases if they're launched: climbing, transferring, dropping. You want to stop missiles in the climbing. You don't want to wait until they're descending. And that's what this missile interceptor system would do. And it would provide some real good security for Canada and the United States if we could figure out a way to join in this together.
Senator Kaine, I know you have many things to do today, so we will thank you for your time.
Really happy to do this,
and for your representation of Canada's interests in the Senate. And we hope that you have a great trip to Ottawa.
It's in all of our interest to keep this long-term friendship strong.
Republican Senator Kevin Cramer is from North Dakota, a state that does more trade with Canada than it does with the rest of the world combined. We caught up with him briefly in between meetings on a busy day in Ottawa. I'm curious to know, you've been talking to President Trump about the Golden Dome. What would Canada's participation in that look like? Would it be part of NORAD? Do we have any sense of that yet?
Well, so the NORAD relationship is already obviously an existing relationship. In fact, I was reminded, and I haven't said this all day, so you're it. You know, I was just recently in Cavalier, North Dakota. Cavalier is a little town near Pembina, North Dakota, along the Manitoba border. Has a small radar station there, a spaceport station. It's been there since the 70s. It's being modernized. It will be an important part. It's a very important part of NORAD and North Command. And there's always a Canadian officer at Cavalier. And I met the current one just a couple of weeks ago with General Gutlein, who's going to be leading the development of Golden Dome. So that relationship already exists. I would think in a complete Golden Dome scenario, what you would see is, first of all, we're talking about Canadian territory. If we're going to protect, you know, the United States, we're not going to start at Pembina, North Dakota, or Seattle, Washington, you know, or the Great Lakes, or Maine. We need to start far north of that in the Arctic, and that means we're going to naturally have to have a relationship with Canada. But Canada also would want to protect itself, and so I think as we build the layers of defense for the North American continent, Canada would be a logical partner. But some of it's even just attitudinal. I couldn't get your previous Prime Minister to even talk about a contribution to NATO that was more significant. I sent him a nasty gram or two and met with him once, and he just doesn't want to talk about it. This Prime Minister is leaning in a big way, and so again, it's all encouragement to me.
What did he say to you about Canada's commitment to defense? It was, for the first time in decades, an election issue in Canada that parties actually put forth in their platforms, very different than America where it's
Right.
regularly discussed.
Right.
What did he tell you in those meetings about his commitment to spending more?
Well, so here's what we said to him. The more definitive we can get about that, the better, I think. But that's between him and the president. One thing that's really crystal clear with Donald Trump at the helm, at the end of the day, no deal is done until he and the other country's leader hashes it out. There are a lot of people working on it. And by the way, Canada has probably the best ambassador to the United States that Canada's ever had in Kirsten Hillman, because she, of course, helped negotiate the USMCA. The first time around, now she's an ambassador to the United States. She's in Washington, D.C., creating lots of good relationships with the knowledge base. So there are a lot of people working on this stuff, but the ultimate deal makers are Carney and Trump, and both of them know how to make a deal.
One last security question for you. There's been a lot of criticism by the president of fentanyl flowing into the U.S. from Canada, the border. Obviously, that happens not at the same level as it does with Mexico,
For
which
sure.
is pretty clear, and a lot of Canadians were very offended by that comparison. But we do have work to do here in Canada too.
Sure.
We just saw figures released by the RCMP today very quietly that our concerns about terrorism for them have gone up by 488% in a year. What do you think Canada needs to do better when it comes to security?
Sure. So this is on both of us, and quite honestly, this issue, because while Canada, has taken some criticism for maybe not paying as close attention to the cartels, maybe not doing as much, testing or whatever you'd say, defense against it. We've moved a lot of our northern border protectors to the southern border. Well, now the southern border's issue is getting fixed pretty fast, thanks to Donald Trump. We're able to bring some of those people back. We're starting to get back to more regular hours at our various ports of entry and things. So all of that stuff, I think, will contribute to a greater sense of confidence that Canada and the United States have a handle on the flow of whether it's fentanyl or people across our border. Remembering though, it is a 5,000-mile border, and so this again is where technology, where NORAD, where Customs and Border Protection, working with Canadian Border Protection folks, comes in, and it's relational. I think that's what I always emphasize is it's relational. We have to do this stuff together. We'll be better at it if we're friends than if we're just tolerating one another. And I don't think that's our culture. I don't think those are our values as Americans or as Canadians. So I'm just here to say thank you, and then to encourage Canadians to take another look and give us another chance.
Well, Senator, thank you for taking the time to join us, and we hope to see you back soon.
I would look forward to that. Thank you.